Welcome to WTF Is Up. I'm Jeremy,
And I'm Omar.
and we're two dads, entrepreneurs, and former tech execs who have been working super hard to make sure that you have everything you need to be a better friend, a better colleague, a better partner, and to basically know WTF is up. In every episode, as you know, we're going to give you these quick hits on what's cooking out there in the world. And then most importantly, WTF you can actually do about it so you can take action right after the episode. And we got to thank you for bearing with us. I know we've been on a little bit of a summer hiatus, but in the meantime, you have made us in the top 20 of all career podcasts on the Apple podcast charts. So congrats, Omar.
Yeah, congrats. And thanks also for your feedback. We got dozens and dozens of emails about things we can improve. So we're going to try to make these a little tighter. We're going to keep trying to focus on news you can use. So take that, Scott Galloway, you jerk. We have something to say that's helpful too. Stop taking up all the oxygen and every damn topic related to business and tech and entrepreneurship and AI and men and et cetera, et cetera.
We're gunning for you, Prop G. Watch your back. But that being said, today's episode is extra special because we're going to be talking about something that is near and dear to our own hearts, which is WTF is up with entrepreneurship. And we say this as entrepreneurs, as people who've built and failed at building businesses. And Omar actually leads one of the country's largest entrepreneurship centers based in a university setting. So definitely coming at it from both practical and conceptual frameworks. And we're so excited to get into it. And in fact, we're so excited. Today's episode is going to be a two-parter. Isn't that right, Omar?
That's right. That's right. So here we go.
Now, no episode, whether it's one part or two parts, can start without a really juicy dad joke. So take it away, Omar.
I don't know how juicy it is. So look, no help from AI on these, so that they're bad. Okay. I've got 3 in my back pocket in case the first 1 or 2 fail, which they will. All right, Jeremy, you ready? What's an entrepreneur's favorite movie?
Field of Dreams? I don't know. I'm blanking out here.
Oh, that's good. I was thinking Pitch Perfect, because they have to pitch and it has to be perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. We'll keep going. What do you call crappy entrepreneurship?
I was going to say Upwork, but to insert your favorite VC failure.
I was thinking entrepreneurship.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank goodness this is a podcast, not a NPR. Yeah.
Yeah. It's dad jokes for, teenage kids.
That's right.
All
That's
right.
right.
Here's my last terrible one. Why did the basketball startup fail?
Oh, man, I know Shaq has tried a lot of things, but tell me why, Omar?
Because they forgot to pivot. Do you know in basketball you have the pivot foot and you have to pivot?
Right.
All right. Look, dad jokes are bad if you have to explain them.
That's right. We're going to call a little traveling violation on that last one.
Yeah.
That being said, let's face the facts, y'all. Entrepreneurship is en fuego because the number of new businesses created in the U.S. just in 2024 alone is 5.2 million, up from 3.5 million just 5 years ago. And so, Omar, I got to ask you, you're on the front lines of this, talking to students and entrepreneurs every single day. Are you seeing this? And most importantly, what's driving it?
Yeah, totally. I'm totally seeing it. So you're right. There's been this huge uptick in entrepreneurial activity. I'm seeing it with the Gen Z-ish students that I work with, the alumni ventures that I advise, but also we know that this is true for every demographic within the American economy right now. According to the latest Global Entrepreneurship Monitor study, this is from Babson and London Business School, total entrepreneurial activity is at a historic high of 19%. So 19% of Americans are involved in an entrepreneurial venture. And this is a significant rise. Less than 7% of those are actually running mature businesses, right? So mostly people are involved in that like early stage, growing, truly small business, trying to get them up and going. And so what's driving it? I'd love to hear what you think, Jeremy, but I think first and foremost is this weird ass job market, right? Go back and listen to the first episode. Just today, on September 9th, the Labor Department revised its job number down for 2025 by 1 million jobs, right? So surely some people are going to get fired for that, by the way. But what we're now seeing finally in the numbers is catching up to the actual representation of how the job market's been feeling on the ground, right? This generationally low unemployment that we've been told for basically since COVID that we have in this country is really not the reality, right? The jobs just ain't out there. For the first time in a long time, we have more job seekers than actual job openings after this downward revision. And we know actually over 2/3 of entrepreneurs cite job scarcity as a primary motive for starting a business. And this has been an upward trend the last few years. So my first answer to this is like, this feels like a pathway that just seems more direct and attainable for more people. And then next episode, we'll talk more about the research that shows entrepreneurship is not just possible, but increasingly being pursued by everyone, right? Especially people who don't want or don't see themselves in a typical 9 to 5 job. I was just taking my daughter to school yesterday and she was like, Dad, we were talking about college and what you do afterwards. She's like, I don't think I'm going to have a typical job. Like, I'm not going to have one job. We weren't even talking about entrepreneurship or AI or any of this stuff. And she's like, I'm just not going to have one job. And I think that's already become the reality for many, many, especially younger workers, right? And so, Jeremy, what do you think about that? What are you seeing?
Yeah, no, I feel like necessity is definitely the mother of invention. And so people are being driven into entrepreneurship. But I'm blown away by that 19% number. 1 in 5 Americans doing something entrepreneurial.
That's
What
right.
does that include, Omar? Is that like side hustles? Is it exploration? What's encompassed in that 19%?
It's just adults actively engaged in starting or running a new business. So
Wow.
it could include side hustles, but that's millions of people in this
Yeah.
country. And so part of what that tells me, Jeremy, is that like entrepreneurship is no longer the rarefied domain of some white tech bros tinkering in a Silicon Valley garage, right? Like, we're going to talk later about myths about entrepreneurship, but the reality is that over half of business owners are over age 55. They're still predominantly white males, but older white males, and the landscape is becoming much more diverse. You have a growing representation of women, minorities, younger entrepreneurs, as we were saying, nearly 90% of both Blacks and Hispanics, where, by the way, the entrepreneurship rate is higher, say that entrepreneurship is a great career choice. And the other thing that I'm seeing day to day in my job and that we're now seeing in the numbers is that it's also trending younger and younger. 18 to 34-year-olds are twice as likely to start a new business than the much larger age group of 34 to 65. So, Jeremy, we're washed up now, man. Um,
Put us out to pasture.
yeah. And in Gen Z in particular is all about it. As you said, I run one of the largest entrepreneurship centers in a university, and I see it all the time. They're really entrepreneurial. Nearly 40% of them already think of themselves as entrepreneurs, and that's under 25% with the boomers. They're also just more optimistic in general, right? Which is a good precursor for entrepreneurship. 4 in 10 already say that they have an active small business or side hustle, right? Somewhere between 62% and 84% of Gen Zs say they want to be entrepreneurs if they're not already. So we're seeing this in all age groups, but especially with the people who are just building their careers.
That's awesome. And so I think this is sort of a perfect segue into not just WTF is up with entrepreneurship. Obviously, it's on fire, but WTF you should do about it if you're considering taking the plunge. So now I think there's 2 elements to really speak to here. Obviously, there's the push of the economy. The worse the job market gets, the more people are driven into entrepreneurship. Then there's the pull or the siren song of entrepreneurship, as seen by influencers on TikTok and Instagram, riding in their Lamborghinis saying, this could be you too. So as two guys who've been around the path just a few times, what should people know about the reality of starting a business? Maybe some of the dark sides that are not included in those TikToks.
The thing that I always tell aspiring entrepreneurs is that there's 2 paths you can take, right? And one is like I-5 in California, right? If you're going to San Francisco to Los Angeles, it's the most efficient way. It's boring as shit. There's nothing to look at. You just got to get through it, but you get through it as efficient as possible. Or you can take the Pacific Coast Highway, right? Route 1, which is scenic, curvy, beautiful, and takes a lot longer, right? And so I always commend aspiring entrepreneurs for realizing that like they don't want to do the boring thing, and you have to pause to appreciate the beauty, i.e. the self-growth and all the learning and the way you're testing yourself that happens in entrepreneurship. But it is also much harder, much windier, much less straightforward. So that's the first thing to level set is like, it looks sexy and influencers try to make it look that way and easy. But the first thing is to disavow yourself of the notion that it is that, right? It is a grind. And I find it really interesting that people are opting out of 9 to 5s to do this, and also doing many Gen Zs, as we said, 40% are doing this as side hustles already, because it fills your hours, right? One of the hardest challenges I've had in working with young entrepreneurs in particular is just, where does your business and your venture start and stop, and where do you as a person start and stop, right? How do you turn it off?
Yeah.
and tend to yourself. But what do you think? What do you see happening here with respect to this question of, the less glorified parts of entrepreneurship?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, Omar. Let me give an example here. When it comes to the fact that a lot of times in entrepreneurship, the less glamorous, the less sexy the business, the more likely to succeed.
Yep.
Think about the exhibit A and exhibit B of our businesses. So when I first started, probably a decade ago, so you know what? I'm sick of working for the man. I want to do my own thing. I started a business to help people break into tech because that's what I had done. That was my story. And even though it was a weird, obscure story, when I would go out there to look online and say, hey, is anyone else doing tech career coaching for liberal arts grads? There was nothing out there. And so I was getting all excited. This is my chance, a total blue ocean for me to conquer. But the fact that no one else was doing it, and it was super sexy and it was super out there, actually made it a terrible business because it meant that no one wanted it. Versus when you and I were chatting, I think at a Whole Foods in San Mateo one day, and we were like, we both worked at LinkedIn. No one really understands LinkedIn, but it's really important. And it's super boring, but super essential to job search success. We hit upon a business idea that is still going strong 8 years later because we were actually delivering something that people wanted and people needed, even if it wasn't sexy, even if it didn't have Lamborghinis involved. And so I do think that if you are thinking about taking the plunge, you have to say, okay, am I willing to do some of the unsexy stuff? To go down a path that may not be as glamorous as I see on TikTok if I know that's the path for success. But what are you seeing, Omar? Is that something that people are wrestling with? How should someone weigh the pros and cons of which path to take?
Well, we'll talk about this in part two, but one thing we tell our entrepreneurs is to not focus on the potential upside, right? Including the way it's glamorized in social media, but to focus on your affordable loss. What are you willing to lose, right? Instead of what you have potentially to gain. But Jeremy, I'm curious how you would advise people on that very differentiator you just talked about, which is how do you know whether you've actually hit on a decent idea? And
Yeah.
how do you know if it's something that you can authentically do? Because I think a lot of people in entrepreneurship talk about product market fit. Less often they talk about founder market fit or even founder product fit. Why are you the person that can deliver this? And in the case of LinkedIn, you and I helped start the team that was marketing and selling products to college students and to colleges, right? So we kind of built a little bit of an expertise around how are they using this thing? How could they use it better? And that made us credible messengers. So how do you know if it's even a good idea in general, but for you specifically?
Yeah. So let me give people the A/B test version of what I just laid out before. This is the wrong way to do it and then the right way. So back with that breaking the tech business that I was alluding to, I spent an entire year unpaid building out content, building out online courses, all this stuff, Field of Dream style, because if I believed that if I built it, they would come. Indeed, they did not come. And I had an entire year down the drain. So that's the wrong way to do it. As you may recall, Omar, it was probably about a month from the time that you and I chatted at that Whole Foods in San Mateo to us blasting an email to every career coach in America saying, hire us to train your students on how to use LinkedIn. I don't think we had the courses. I don't think we had a workshop. We just had an idea and we weren't afraid to fail. We weren't afraid to put it out there. And it was only when we started to hear back from people saying, yeah, I'll pay you for this, even though I've never heard of you. This is a big pain point in our lives. That's when we knew we had something real, something actually worth building. And so I know it feels like putting the cart before the horse to go out there into the market before you have the product ready. But in some ways, that's the best way to go because it avoids wasting your time. What have you seen, Omar? Have you seen examples of that with students or entrepreneurs?
Yeah, totally. Fear of failure is the biggest thing. And there definitely are ways that you can mitigate that in the way you approach your business. So I agree with you, Jeremy. Like when you if you're a B2B business and you get a customer, a paying customer that actually might have some credibility with other customers that are like them, that's huge. That's a huge indicator that you've done something, right? And then you're putting all of your effort into referencing them to get new customers and servicing the current customers really, really, really well, right? Because it's always easier to upsell a current customer or retain them than it is to get a net new one. You also can run and you should run a lot of little experiments and be super, super curious about your customer, about your user, not even necessarily about your product or your solution. The advice I always give is like, nerd the hell out on the problem you are trying to solve, the specific pain point that they have that needs an aspirin, not a vitamin. It has to be a real pain point they're willing to pay for. If you get really, really curious about that acute pain point with a specific customer segment as narrow as possible, and then be flexible on the solution, that's where you can have success. We all know that startups pivot many, many times, and there's so many great stories about the pivot. But the reason that they've done that is because they're still usually focused on that very same problem and customer segment. It's just the way in which they're going about solving it. They realized maybe it was a vitamin, not an aspirin. So that's my number one piece of advice is obsess over the problem for a specific customer group, the job that they need to hire some product or service for, and let the solution sort of flow from that. That does require putting some things out there that they can generally, prototypes and things that people can respond to, because often they don't know really what's true pain until they see something that can ease it. But you don't have to stab in the dark for a year and try to build the foundation. You can be building things on the fly, getting those in front of customers, and really, really deeply interrogating and doing a lot of customer discovery around what is that pain point that they have.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think this gets really down to solution mode. And before we get into the actual prescription of like, hey, how can you build a great business if you're scratching the surface today? Let's start with some of the myths. Because again, I think there's so much noise out there in the entrepreneurship culture writ large about you got to do this or you got to do that. What are some of the myths that you hear when you counsel students, Omar, about this is what it takes to be an entrepreneur today?
Well, I think the first thing is that like going this path, at least for some period of time, is not just about entrepreneurship, right? It's not just about whether your venture succeeds or fails, or your small business makes it or not. By the way, the success rates for small businesses are way, way higher than we typically hear. We hear 1 in 10 businesses doesn't make it. That's true for businesses of a certain size. That's true for VC funded businesses, but that's less than 1% of businesses. So, a lot of small businesses actually stick around for longer than 15 years, end up hiring 5 to 300 employees. So, be positive and optimistic that this can happen. There's some things you need to do that we'll talk about to give yourself the optimal chances of success. But separate from that, I want to say, especially to people who are thinking about this moment with AI displacement, white collar work being displaced, what kind of career are you going to build or pivot yourself into, maybe your mid-career? It's not just about entrepreneurship. I believe strongly that entrepreneurship is the best teacher to learn while doing. And that gives you future value in a variety of careers, sectors, types of roles. And it's another great response to this weird ass job market and economy is not just like betting on yourself, but actually accelerating your learning by doing it. And I just want to say that entrepreneurship as a pathway has a lot of career value. When we worked in big tech, Jeremy, I remember just I feel like we threw job offers at former entrepreneurs or like early joiners, right? Even if their ventures totally flopped after 6 months, it was just the fact that you had been an entrepreneur and tried to do a startup or a small business. Because in my mind, the hardest thing to find with employees these days is hunger, scrap, right? Proactive problem solving, selling your ideas to other humans, being a change agent. These are things that anybody who's hired people knows entrepreneurs have in spades. What they have to work on is organizational fit. And then those with traditional skill sets that may or may not be becoming increasingly obsolete because of AI. By the way, they are becoming obsolete because of AI, but how to interact with people, how to function in matrix organizations, how to friggin' manage a calendar, right? Have those soft skills. You have to learn the entrepreneurial method, which is both a mindset and a skill set, but those are learnable. So that's my first myth I want to explode is that this is just about entrepreneurship proper. No, this helps you learn. This accelerates your learning. This gives you real value to a variety of employers in the future. What do you think, Jeremy?
Yeah, I want to really highlight what you said about learning by doing. I want to emphasize the doing part of that
Yeah.
because I think that one of the traps that I certainly fell into and fall into all the time, frankly, is this trap of wannabe entrepreneurship as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to actual entrepreneurship. What do I mean by that? Well, we all know that the human brain has been conditioned by evolution to resist hard things. Hard things burn up energy, they threaten your survival. So let's make things as easy and simple as possible. What could be easier and simpler than having business cards printed out, registering a domain, making a website versus actually going out there into the world like
Incorporating,
you were
getting
talking
accounting
incorporated. Yeah.
software. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember you always saying this, let's spend less time trying to be a business and more time being an actual business.
Yeah, right. And so the reality is I totally get it because it made me feel better. It made me feel like I was doing at least something. But unfortunately, all I was doing was moving further and further away from what you called out, Omar, which is understanding my audience, understanding their needs, developing something useful. So my number one myth is do not fall prey to all the trappings of entrepreneurship. Be an actual entrepreneur. But back to you, Omar. What else are you seeing out there in terms of potential pitfalls for our future entrepreneurs?
Yeah, well, we'll get to pitfalls, but I think that's really good advice. And just remember, the best signal that you can get is a sale. And for so many entrepreneurs, especially those with some tech fluency, and we all have some of that now with AI, right? You want to like rabbit hole into creating a great product, and that isn't the way to do it, right? And I would challenge you to find any story of somebody who's like sat in a cave and coded or vibe coded for a year and come out with a perfect polished thing that has instantly had product market fit, right? I guess another myth is that it's all about having the idea. One thing that we're seeing in the graduate business school environment, but even down into undergrad, even high school grads who haven't been to college, mid-career professionals who are looking to do something different that, isn't going to get replaced by AI, is the rise of something called entrepreneurship through acquisition. We have so many students who say, I love entrepreneurship. I want to operate something. I want to be my own boss, but I don't have the idea, right? I don't necessarily have a singular passion that I must see through in the world. And so this field is all about buying a business that you want to go run. And this is actually a really successful path to entrepreneurship with a big E that many of our most famous entrepreneurs have actually done, right? Elon Musk did not start SpaceX or Twitter or Tesla, right? He bought them. And so entrepreneurship acquisition has been called the hot new MBA hustle. There's a whole process by which MBAs in particular, but even mid-career searchers can find businesses to acquire that typically fall in a like $2 to $10 million EBITDA range, which is basically their earnings. These are cash flow positive businesses. Think about your HVACs of the world, but also increasingly vertical SaaS, right? Like the business we started, really addressing a specific customer segment with a technology platform that solves a very specific need. And we've seen so much investment go into this because you have now search funds and private equity firms who are saying, oh, yeah, I'll go let somebody smart and hardworking go figure out what businesses are good investments. And it's a lot of work. Often you have to go through hundreds or even thousands of conversations and outreach to potential businesses before you find the right one for you and the right one that you can turn into something even more valuable. But it's a really exciting time, I think, for this somewhat adjacent path around entrepreneurship. And you also have what's being called the silver tsunami, right? 73% of business owners planning to exit their companies as they go into retirement in the next few years. So it's a $14 trillion opportunity, all of these small businesses that people want to exit and give you a direct and quicker path perhaps to entrepreneurship. And these are established businesses, right? You're still doing all the great learning of figuring out how to operate something, but without having to do that 0 to 1. Often that's the hardest part, right? In addition to joining, right? We haven't even talked about joining startups, but that can be a great teacher early on in your career as well. You have to be willing to tolerate the risk. But if you're looking at VC funded companies, you might want to think about Series B or later funded in terms of a little bit more stability. But again, those can go belly up too. So just know that those can be short term. But I've seen so many people build a career with just startup to startup kind of hopping. And that can be a real skill set as well, and an industry unto itself. Jeremy, any other
Yeah.
myths you want to explode?
No, I just want to agree with you about especially the entrepreneurship through acquisition. I had never heard of that when I was in business school. And I have a business school buddy today who's in the midst of buying a woodworking factory in Michigan, of all places. And of course, as a Silicon Valley ridiculous guy, I was like, oh, it's not a .com. It's not, SaaS this and AI that. And then I looked at the financials and it's making like 30% margins
Yep.
consistently year after year for decades. And so it
Yep.
just shows there are multiple ways to get to the promised land if you're hungry to get there.
And now you have PE roll-up firms who are very interested in acquiring a lot of these businesses in certain industries. And the typical exit that we're seeing for MBAs who've done this is 3 to 5 million, right? And that's in
Wow.
addition to the cash that you've made from these businesses throughout that time. So I love this trend of just betting on yourself and actually giving yourself the time and raising the funds to conduct those searches can be the hard part. So Jeremy, as we tee up our next episode where we get really tactical on some best practices for entrepreneurs and dig into some of the research on how successful entrepreneurs think, what's one thing that people can do in the next week to really school themselves and be prepared?
Yeah. So here's my ultimate hack. It's going to combine both AI and getting out of the building, getting back into the real world. So I think a lot of times we really struggle, whether as job seekers or want to be entrepreneurs, to identify our strengths. Kind of like that classic Japanese concept of ikigai. What makes us great? What makes us unique? And if you take your resume or your LinkedIn profile or your Myers-Briggs and you feed it into ChatGPT and say, hey, what could I do uniquely well that others might struggle with? It's going to spit out all the stuff that you've never thought of because we all have our blinders on and we all don't have omniscience into the things that are possible. So get a sense of all the things that are out there. And then for one where you're really sort of lighting up because you're like, oh, that's intriguing. Don't just talk to ChatGPT, talk about it. Talk to a real prospective customer. Let's say, for instance, it says, hey, you're amazing at marketing. You're amazing at baking. What if you start a new vegan bakery that's really focused on this burgeoning segment? What if you went out there and talked to someone who might be interested in buying your stuff and say, hey, would you pay $5 for this? Would you pay $10 for this? Even if you don't get them to buy something at the end of that conversation, at least you've taken that baby step towards that product market fit that is so critical behind every great business. So that's my little homework assignment, Omar. Spend a little time on yourself and then spend a little time out there in the world. What would you say, Omar?
I love it. I love it. And next week, we'll talk about a concept called the crazy quilt, which is exactly what you said. Talk to people, forget the stupid stealth mode thing that sometimes people talk about in entrepreneurship. You're trying to bring potential collaborators in, and it's really sales. So I love that idea of like talking to people and not just staying in your own echo chamber. Um, I would also say, related to kind of what you were saying, really spend some time thinking about what is that thing that I really need to solve, right? Again, obsessing over pain points, not necessarily products or solutions. What is the thing that not just I am passionate about solving, that I see a gap that needs to be solved? Going back to that founder market fit, it makes sense that I could do this. Much like our example about building a business, training people on how to use LinkedIn, that was our expertise, right? And it doesn't always mean that you have to have that expertise now. You can create a plan to develop that expertise. And Lord knows our collective expertise is shifting rapidly right now, and it's easier than ever to learn new things and to outsource parts of things to right, that we might have needed to do ourselves before. Like, do you even need to build a web page anymore? I don't know. Do you need to hire Fiverr? Do you need to hire people on Fiverr, Upwork to like create logos and all the other trappings of doing business, as you said, Jeremy? But doing that deep work you're talking about of like, what is the thing that I could actually see myself obsessing over when I'm on that scenic route of, of yes, it's really exciting and I'm doing the thing that is meant for me, but it's hard and windy, and curvy and scary. That requires some real passionate connection and usually about the problem and or the customer segment. Last thing I would say is think about who you could go into business with, right? Think about your network who's already in business that you might want to get in touch with and maybe you could join, right? Or start as an unpaid advisor or something, or take something off their plate for them and ramp into some bigger work, because most successful businesses of all sizes are not usually the solo entrepreneur, right? It's usually two people. And Jeremy, I think we had a pretty good experience doing that together. And that is such an important element here to not just holding yourself accountable and building something with somebody, but it's just more fun. It's just more fun. It keeps you going and it's more fun. And I think ultimately you get to better quality everything because you're collaborating with someone who can help raise your game. So think about who that could be for you, who complements your skill set, who has a somewhat different network to you even, and different insights, different way of going about their work and building something. That's what I would say. Do that deep work of what problems do you love and who could you nerd out on that problem with.
Well, on that note of nerding out, I'm so excited for next week's episode, Omar, because we're going to dive super deep, super geeky into all the trappings of the entrepreneurial culture, hustle culture, venture capital, what AI means for entrepreneurship, and so much more. So do us two huge favors. Number one, tune in next week. But number two, give us some love online, a rating, a review, because that helps other folks discover this podcast. Omar, anything else you want people to be thinking about as they get ready to take their entrepreneurial journey?
The stakes to get involved in entrepreneurship, whether as an entrepreneur or a joiner, have never been lower than they are at this very moment in your life. I think that's true for anybody at any stage of their life. Life is only going to get more complicated. It's never going to, rarely will it ever get simpler. So take the jump when you can.
Hey, you heard it here first. That is WT is up. WTF is up with entrepreneurship. And we've got a whole lot more coming next week. Until then, on behalf of Omar, this is Jeremy signing off.